One other component to think about too is that some manufacturers now have a toolless arm, which means that, and this is easiest for the staff, that I can remove these arms, which we should be doing and inspecting, which we'll get to that. But a toolless model means you don't have to have a wrench or a screwdriver to take it off. You should be able to do it with your hands. And so this can be very helpful for our SPD techs. And then lastly is the end cap. There's going to be some form of cap and a pin that holds that cap in place at the end of your sprayer arm itself.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal: to help you fight dirty, every instrument, every time. Whether you're tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go beyond clean.
What's up, Clean Freaks? Hank Balch in studio with
your man, Bobby Parker.
Your man, my man, your man, everyone's man, Bobby Parker, and we are excited to kick off season 25. Crazy. These seasons are adding up so quick, but season 25 of the Beyond Clean podcast, your favorite and only and largest CE provider in the history of sterile processing podcast on our favorite industry. And Bobby, today we are talking to none other than maybe the biggest, the earliest clean freak out there, Randalyn Harreld, on the topic of washer arms. Are you ready for this?
So ready. I think the topic of the small things that we've been getting at the last couple of seasons, but this one in particular, really helpful, things that are easy to overlook. And I just want to say, hang with us, because I can hear people saying, please don't show this episode to Joint Commission. Please, not another logbook of another thing to keep track of. But these things aren't just important for accreditation. They're important to patient safety. That's why we pick the topics we have. So I'm excited to talk to Randalyn about washer arms and how that plugs into the patient.
It's a great building on the themes, as you alluded to. You know, we kicked off 2024 with the roles that make us great, and then we went into the papers that make us awesome. And so these are the little things that make a big difference in sterile processing. So to Bobby's point, this episode is going to be worth it, and it's going to be a little taste of what's to come in the rest of season 25. So hang with us. We'll be right back in studio with Randalyn Harreld.
I'm Bobby Parker.
And I'm Hank Balch.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
All right, Clean Freaks, we're back in studio, episode 1, kicking off season 25 of the little things that make a big difference in sterile processing. And I did not even have to twist the arm of our next guest. She jumped in and was like, no, that's what I want. And I want to have this conversation to help us kick off season 25. So Randalyn Harreld, you're probably familiar with her if you've been in this space before, but if you've been following Beyond Clean, you're definitely familiar with her. She's been on the podcast with us, been to some conferences, was an early member of the Beyond Clean advisory group. So Randalyn, it's an honor to get you back in the studio with us today. Your current title, I know you know this, but folks tuning in may not, is Clinical Education Manager for the U.S. at Bellimand. So what exactly do you get to do every day with that title?
Oh boy, everything. A lot of different things. I cover the U.S., so that's a large territory. So obviously travel, visit customer sites. I am a huge advocate for the customer. So I support our sales team in everything clinical. Along with our customers, I manage our customer advisory panel. I create all of our CE content. I teach our courses. I run a program called Clinical Classroom, offer support in large projects and renovations we do, and pretty much anything that a customer needs that is SPD related, I'm there.
It's one of those dream job titles too. Like I think when you're in sterile processing, you're like, I could stay in the hospital side and I can grow and I can be an educator, I can be a manager. But then, many of us were kind of sitting there dreaming like, well, if I went over to the dark side, if you will, sometimes they say that, but what would I want to do? And, a lot of times it's like, I don't want to necessarily sell. I want to do something that's like a little closer to that clinical heart of sterile processing. So yeah, when you get into a role like that, it's really, really fun because you don't have to let any of that passion go. You still get to bring it at scale across the country. So that's great.
Very true. Yep. Not selling, but supporting the sale, but also just, being the voice of the customer to our team.
So speaking of the customer, we're going to be talking about what customers and just, I guess, users in general in sterile processing have to encounter each and every day. And this is one of those little things that's easy to take for granted, but the whole theme of this season as those are the things that could oftentimes make or break the process. So let's just kick it off. When we say wash your arm, what in the world do we mean and why do they exist?
Yeah, absolutely. Love this topic. Love that it landed on me now. Obviously I work for BeliMed, so we have washer arms. So I have become even more of an expert, but depending on whatever washer you have, a mechanical washer disinfector, the washer arm is located inside of the chamber. Usually you've got one at the top and one in the bottom. And again, it just depends on what kind you have. And it's also the washer arm or sprayer arm is located on the washer rack themselves. And so this is what makes the mechanical cleaning process in that washer happen. So when you think about what do they do, these washer arms are critical to the cleaning process because they do exactly that. They provide a spraying action that uses pressurized water to remove, one, the residual bioburden or things that we're trying to clean, and then two, to rinse free and provide our cleaning agent to the items that we're cleaning. So it is the component of the washer that makes this sprayer action and this mechanical cleaning process happen. So little thing, big difference.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I like to think of it in terms of like the sprayer arm that you might find inside a dishwasher. Typically, they're going around in a circle really fast. Is there anything to that spinning action? Like, why not have more of the car wash style that just kind of go up and down along the sides of the car as you're going through? Any reason for them always being some kind of spinning movement in the washer?
Well, so you want constant sustained pressure. So the sustained pressure of the water that's coming through the arms is what's contributing to the overall process. And we've heard this term impingement many times. Maybe you haven't, but impingement is what's actually happening. They spin because the water that's coming out of the sprayer arm needs to reach as much of the surfaces as possible on these items that we're sending through. So ensuring that we have a thorough coverage and that we have a strong cleaning power that's taking place. So by spinning at multiple levels in multiple directions is allowing this cleaning action to really reach all areas of that chamber. And we want to reach all surfaces of the surgical instruments that we're putting in there. And so we talk about placement of the trays and making sure that our instruments are in some form of open and upright position. This dual action and these multiple sprayers going in these multiple directions is allowing that to happen and to reach as much of the surface as possible.
Right. So you've got sprays coming from top, bottom, side, middle, every direction in the washer. So that makes a lot of sense. Thinking about those spinning spray arms, I had this misconception when I started in sterile processing that there was some kind of motorized component that was doing that. And this starts to get into the conversation of maybe what can go wrong with sprayer arms. But can you talk through a little bit of, how these sprayer arms are made and how and why they spin? Because in my experience, at least, it's not little motors that are turning those spray arms, but actually the water pressure itself that's doing it, right?
Yeah, it's all about the pressure and the water. So yeah, great. So first, before I get into kind of the components, I do want to just shed light on recommendation is familiarizing yourself with the washer that you have. So we don't talk about this enough, but the techs need to know, hey, you got a washer, know what kind of spraying action you have and what it looks like. There's a reason there's a clear glass door on that washer. So once you get a washer, maybe it's new or not, make sure you know what that's supposed to look like. Is it supposed to go this direction, up and down, right to left, so that when it's not functioning properly, by looking at the washer, you can recognize that. You should be able to see it should look consistent. That's just a recommendation. But there's usually, with the sprayer arms, like I said, 2 rotating, one at the top of the chamber, one on the bottom of the chamber. And then the washer arm itself is comprised of the long stretch of arm that goes from one side of the rack to the other. It should be about the length of the rack itself. And then there's holes in the arm where the water and the detergent and the actual spray is coming out. We call that the spray nozzle. In the center of the arm, there's going to be like a rotor bearing or some form of attachment mechanism. This is what is holding those 2 sprayer arms to the chamber in place to the machine. Very important. Those have to be fully attached. Whatever model you have, they have to be secured and locked in place, because as soon as you start to lose or minimize any of that pressure, or you have a little bit of a leak, it's going to affect the overall cleaning process. And then some of the trickier components on the arm itself is going to be a screw. You could have a slide ring. You can have a couple O-rings, which are small little rubber components that make that secure, tight fit so we don't have a leak. And then you might have a locking bolt, and that locking bolt is again, extremely critical, because it's what's holding the arm in place and securing it during its function and making sure that we have a successful spray, that's happening. One other component to think about too is that some manufacturers now have a toolless arm, which means that, and this is easiest for the staff, that I can remove these arms, which we should be doing and inspecting, which we'll get to that. But a toolless model means you don't have to have a wrench or a screwdriver to take it off. You should be able to do it with your hands. And so this can be very helpful for our SPD techs. And then lastly is the end cap. There's going to be some form of cap and a pin that holds that cap in place at the end of your sprayer arm itself.
I'm glad we started with this components question, Randalyn, because it is the foundation for the next question on, okay, we've got this complex arm. Like, this is a mechanism that has a lot of pieces, and those pieces are all doing very important things, to your mention about the pressure, even the O-rings. Without stealing your thunder here, let me just ask you, in this complex kind of mechanism here, what issues are common in the space? And, you can speak to your own experience, obviously, like you're a sterile processing professional at heart. Obviously, you've seen this up close and personal on the user side. And then obviously you're supporting teams all around the country. What are you seeing out there? What are you hearing out there on a regular basis when it comes to problems around washer arms?
Sure. The first one is exactly what I talked about, losing parts. So we've got multiple components. We've got these teeny tiny rubber O-rings. We've got a pin at the end, sometimes resembles a paper clip. In some of these newer models, it's a tiny little wire and it holds the cap in place. So losing the parts, this is what I see the most now on this side of things. And they may not even realize it, right? They are losing this spraying action and they're having failures in their cleaning process because they didn't realize that the 2 O-rings are missing. And so we've got to do some investigation. So making sure that we have the parts available, and that secondly, that they're putting the arms back on the proper racks where they belong. And so we see a lot of situations where maybe they're not all interchangeable, or they're putting the top on the bottom and bottom on the top, or interchanging them on the racks. This is critical and can affect the overall outcome. And then another issue, really avoiding PMs, right? Avoiding a fearful or just not aware and not educated to the process of what our daily inspections include. And we'll get to that in maintenance, but not inspecting these sprayer arms for buildup, not noticing that they're built up, not knowing what the sprayer action is supposed to look like. And so everybody thinks, hey, it's working. I see water moving around in there.
That's right.
But
There's something going on.
Yeah, it's moving, but even just one O-ring missing could minimize you down 20% of the functionality of what it actually should be doing from a pressure perspective. So, missing parts, avoiding daily inspections, avoiding PMs, and then really removing those holding pins at the end and leaving the caps off. And so again, that's going to change the level of pressure that we have when those caps are off. And now you got water spraying all over the place. And if you do have a model that is not tool-less and requires a tool, so our older generation models, got to have a screwdriver to take that cap off, or even to get your hand down in the chamber and loosen it up. It might be very tight. We're not providing these tools to our staff, right? We're not giving them a screwdriver, or we're not, educating them how to remove it. Maybe you have service or biomed doing that, but who's back there using this, right? Our frontline workers. So giving them the resources and educating and training them on how to actually take these things off and put them back on.
That's a great takeaway, even on the tool piece, because it's one of those things you don't necessarily think about equipping your department with, like a toolkit, because especially on the instrumentation piece, like a lot of those, if there is a screw we can see, we're like, don't touch that thing. That needs to go out to the repair van or, to the OEM or whatever. But, for these kinds of maintenance questions and PMs, as we're going to get to here, yeah, you got to have the tools. Every year around Christmas, there's like those little warning signs. Well, I get Christmas and Father's Day, like there's warning signs out there that the number one injury is using tools inappropriately or like the wrong tool for, whatever it is you're trying to do. So there's a lot of things that could look like a screwdriver. We all do, which is why we need to be warned not to do that. You need the right tool for what it is that you're being asked to service and support. So that's a great highlight there. So you spoke to this a little bit, Randalyn, but I just want to follow up on that last piece. Clearly, there's a lot of things that can go wrong, and you listed a number of those different issues to watch out for. But when those things go wrong, what's the potential impact to the goal of this whole washing process?
Massive. So in some situations that I've seen, we'll say nightmare stories where the staff and the department thinks that everything is working fine and is assuming that everything is functioning the way it should, but it's really not. And then we get into this downfall spiral of quality defects and cost and expense. So replacing the racks, replacing the components. One nightmare story that I can highlight is rubber bands, nightmare rubber bands, right? These orange rubber bands that were being used to hold instruments together that were coming back from clinics, made it into the chamber and made it into every sprayer arm and clogged all of these sprayer arms. And you can even see this orange discoloration in the washer where they started to melt down on the heating component, but they clogged all of it, lint and debris. I've seen strings. And so it's really important that we are aware of what we're putting in the washer in these trays. And there's a reason why we remove garbage and debris, and we try to do this very thorough pre-cleaning step. We spend a lot of money on this equipment. We need to be taking care of this equipment. And when it functions properly, it's going to make our lives easier and better, our cleaning outcomes better, ultimately faster throughput and productivity and safer outcomes for the patient. And so it really is a major component to the whole overall decontamination process. And a lot of these washers, they're equipped to do this with minimal pre-cleaning. It just so happens in the US, our IFUs dictate a very robust manual cleaning process, but that is not like that universal or globally. So take care of the equipment. We're investing in the equipment, and it starts with the sprayer arm inspections.
Yeah, it's crazy to think how the sprayer nozzles, I think as you called them on the washer arms, could have a direct impact on a patient, but absolutely can, particularly in a situation like that. So me and the rest of the listeners don't want our washers clogged up with bits of orange rubber band. So you spoke earlier to some of these issues arising out of neglecting preventive maintenance. Could you talk us through maybe what are some of those preventive maintenance steps that facilities can take to try to avoid issues like that? Again,
just checking the washer arms daily. And I have seen this done in a variety of ways with just having a responsible person who's dedicated to do it, like a decontamination navigator, or maybe you have, as you just talked about on a season, a lead tech who could be responsible for this, but somebody's got to be doing it. So inspecting and checking the washer arms daily. Anytime that the equipment is being used, we should be making sure that it's going to function in the capacity that it should. So we get a lot of questions now that I'm on the BeliMed side of, well, how often should I be doing this? And who dictates this timeline? Well, if you're using it, then we should be making sure that it's functioning. So that's the basic answer. And sometimes even every shift. If you are a very busy department with a lot of high volumes and throughput, why not check it every shift? I know if I was on evening shift, I didn't see what happened on first shift. I don't know what was being put in there. So I want to check it to make sure that I'm successful in what I'm producing. Routinely checking the arms for damage, missing parts, and actually cleaning the components of the washer. And so I know that this is sprayer arms, but those screens down below and drain screens are just as critical. But making sure that if you do see things, take it out, remove it, and clean it. Don't be afraid. Take it to the sink. Use a lumen brush down the inside of your sprayer arm. It's okay. We have these tools available. Always reference your operator's manual, IFU user manual for guidance on the actual how to take it apart. And so what pieces you should be removing versus what pieces you should not be removing, because they're all different. We have different models on all of our racks, and I have to reference the manual because I can't remember all of it. And then replacing parts as soon as you can, as soon as you notice that there is something missing, and potentially ordering some backup components. Have a back stock of these O-rings, have a back stock of some of these end caps. Some of these washer arms have anywhere from 10 to 12 components. So we're equipping our staff so that we have it available, so that you're not down an entire washer or you're not down an entire rack. And then obviously the full preventative maintenance that's going to happen from the manufacturer or your service program, whatever that looks like. That could be annual or could be quarterly. It just depends how you set that up. But a lot of these other items would be on a daily basis. And this is stuff that the front line should be doing.
I'd love to see some regular documentation of that too. And I'm sure many of these tracking systems have that capability, to check off that these arms have been checked every day. Is just another, not just to go back and use that kind of disciplinary, but just to be able to make the case for quality that obviously we all want to be able to prove that we're doing the right thing on a regular basis. And these arm checks are a great part of that. But to that quality piece, I want to ask you a follow-up. That your comment about, the international versus the U.S. model and the different standards and expectations there. And it made me think about a very important part of this question, although it's not the mechanical side, is there is such a thing as a washer verification test. And yet, when we're talking PMs for these arms, obviously, if we're kind of using critical thinking here, there's a world that our tests could be passing. And yet there still could be serious quality issues related to arms because of the function of those tests. It's a sample in the chamber. It's not like a huge test that covers every square inch of the chamber. And we're not even necessarily running those every cycle to cycle or shift to shift, like you mentioned. Of if you're really busy, you should probably be checking these arms more than once a day. Is there anything that you may want to add to that conversation around if we have folks listening like, hey, my tests are passing, clearly I don't need to check my arms?
No. Basic answer, no. I don't follow that protocol. Yes. Okay. So our test, not to go too far rabbit hole and to stay as unbiased as I can here with the testing. Yes, that is one component, right? That is a basic component. But for the most part with those tests, it's giving us a baseline and it's a sample, right? So you're running it on a general instrument cycle, first of the day. Okay. Well, what about all the other stuff that happens? And you're asking us to program 10 cycles on your washer because you have so much different inventory and so much complexity with the devices that you are putting in there. Yes, you need to be following all these other inspection points. And that test is only one portion of what a full quality program would look like. And so for me, I created my own decontam quality audit checklist for my staff. There were over 40 checkpoints to do before we would start using our washers. And so, yes, that verification cleaning was one checkpoint out of those 40. And so there's a lot of things that we should be checking, and we should be setting our team up for success by doing this. We talk about auditing trays all day long, and we talk about looking for indicators and all these audits we do on case carts and point of use care, but do an audit on just your reprocessing equipment in decontamination. How are you utilizing it? Are you utilizing it to its fullest potential? And really getting equipped with the functionality and how it should be utilized. I mean, it really comes down to educating our team, and I think you have to do all of these inspection points on anything that you're using in the decontamination process.
I think any of our listeners would love to see that Randalyn 40-piece checklist, right? One of the gaps that I've seen in departments where there might be a sprayer arm issue is in high volume facilities that maybe have 4 washers, but they've got maybe 7 or 8 of the washer carriages. So even though you're doing your daily testing, maybe you're only testing your 4 favorite carriages, but the other 4 that get used later in the day, they've got washer arm issues. So just from a practical standpoint, what would you recommend as a useful workflow to make sure that we're getting checks on all those washer arms, even beyond just our washer tests or the ones that got used in the morning?
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that is very true. We've got departments that might have 4, new washers or 4 washers, but they have 16 to 20 racks, right? So our models of racks out there vary. So we've got MIS racks, lumen channel racks that can flush lumens. We've got the robotic specialty racks, minimally invasive racks. We've got all these components. And so first and foremost, creating your own audit for those items and incorporating that into that checklist. 2, an inventory. What do you have back there? It's not just the washer, and it's not just the arms on the washer, but it's all of those racks. And then, like Hank said, it goes back to documentation. So if you've got the capability of recording this in your ITS, go for it. If not, you're using a manual process, that's fine. We have helped customers with barcoding all of the racks. We label the racks. We come up with the names and the nomenclature so they can build the rack into their ITS. And every time they inspect it, I've actually helped, this is a great idea, helped a lot of facilities build it as its own item in their instrument tracking. When you scan that barcode on that rack, a count sheet comes up, and on that count sheet is where I had put what steps they need to complete in that verification of that rack itself. And so it's just getting creative. It's getting creative and trying to prepare your team so they don't have to do it all from memory. We scan everything else that we're doing back there. We use our computers. So set them up with something that they're familiar with and try to build it that way so that they don't have to do it from memory.
I love that practical advice. Very commonsensical. It's the kind of thing, though, that when you hear it, you're like, oh, man, I should have thought about that before. Because, obviously, we use count sheets for all kinds of other things, to your point, but to use them in this context, I think that's brilliant, because it's not a new tech, not a new process. We're already familiar with it. Great takeaway and great interview so far. I got one more question here, Randalyn, that I want to throw at you. In the spirit of the little things, for anyone who's into country music here in the U.S., Alan Jackson's got a little song called Little Bitty. It's all right to be little bitty. So I want to ask you a question on what's another little bitty thing in sterile processing that, in your opinion, can make a big difference in our mission of fighting dirty out there?
I'm glad you asked. I could give you a long list of items, but I am going to choose one that was painful for me in my years of experience, and that is linen. We utilize linen in a variety of ways in the department, right? We use it to clean, to wipe surfaces. We use it for when it's processed, possibly for the cases themselves. And so the so-called lint-free blue towels, I'll say, or sheets or baby blankets, all the way to the scrubs that we are wearing. So an example is we utilize or may have an offsite laundering facility that, hey, we send those towels to, they get processed by an outside entity, they send them back to us, and we're good to go. Well, I have seen where they're sent back to us, they're already blue wrapped, they're already taped, and then they're stickered with a sticker to put in the sterilizer. Those consumables and those products are not anything that we're using in our department. So one, what are they buying? What is the shelf life of this blue wrap that this third party laundry facility is? They're not sterile processing professionals, I'm assuming. Maybe they are, but is anybody visiting, those facilities and educating them? We're losing also the capacity to inspect the towel before it goes into my sterilizer chamber. And so I'm just trusting they delivered them to us in this big truck, in this blue tote. They weren't covered. We talk about not bringing dirt from the outside in, and we put all of this work into our environment and keeping our SPD secure and clean. But I've seen these things come in big dirty totes that have never been cleaned, that are filthy. And it's like we're offloading them and then we're just hurrying up and sending these things through the sterilizer. And so it's really pains me. This is a big one. It makes a massive difference because it goes against everything we practice with infection control and cross-contamination in our department, all the way down to the scrubs that we're wearing. So I would just say, knowing what is the laundering process of any linen that you are doing. Are the items that you're doing, do they come with an IFU? What protocols are you following? Have we communicated with that laundering facility to see what kind of detergents or items they are using? Are they truly, lint-free? And how are they cleaning the scrubs? I mean, I'm wearing a pair of scrubs that you probably wore the same scrubs yesterday. And I saw you and Decontam sweating, and now I got to get them, and she's going to get them tomorrow. And it's like, I'm a germaphobe already. So, it's one of those things I think just makes a huge difference if we would dug into that a little deeper.
So, Randalyn, you didn't know this yet, but we're actually doing an interview this season on the little things that we're going to be talking about OR sterile towels, or, sterile towels in general. And so I'm so glad you brought that up. We're going to dive into it. We haven't done the interview yet. I don't know what direction it's going to go, but that little thing, you're not the only one that cares about that. And so we're going to be getting that conversation out there. So you have to tune into that along with everybody else here as this season 25 continues. But hey, terrific interview on these arms questions. And obviously great insight again from the user perspective, from your experience as a clinical educator. Like, you just dropped so many great knowledge bombs on us today. And I know this is going to be terrific feedback. And anyone who's not already connected with Randalyn through LinkedIn, we're going to have her contact information in the write-up of the show. So if you've got additional questions, which there's many more where this wash your arm conversation goes, because we just got half an hour here, but we're still scratching the surface of the nuance. So please connect with her and reach out. And Randalyn, I just want to thank you again for your time to come on the podcast with us today.
Thank you so much, Hank. It was fun and happy to be here.
All right, that was Randalyn Harreld, the Clinical Education Manager at SteelcoBelimed and Bobby Washer Arms. When I threw this outline over this season, was this something that you thought would be on the list of little things?
I would say yes, but only because towards the end of my time managing a sterile processing department, we got tuned in a little closer to this and started a logbook and barcoded all of our washer racks, and it became a passion point of mine. So if it wasn't on your outline, I was going to make sure it made it on there.
It should have been.
Yeah. So really important topic. When we got started talking to Randalyn and you mentioned you didn't have to twist her arm, I thought you were going dad pun there.
I was.
Oh, okay, good. Good. I was shaking my head over here. But yeah, really great conversation. And I think Randalyn nailed it on everything that's important, at least from the big picture perspective.
So, Bobby, what's the weirdest thing? Like, she mentioned rubber bands. Maybe the weirdest or the grossest thing that you've ever identified in a washer arm?
I think the one that ends up in the washer arms most that I've seen are the little tabs that sometimes break off rigid containers when you pop them open, the piece of the lock that stays in the container. Those, for whatever reason, end up in there all the time. And then the one that's the worst to deal with is, you asked what's the weirdest. I'm just giving you the most sensible. I think the one that causes the most trouble are paper type indicators that don't get pulled out of the tray, and they just turn into mush and end up everywhere.
Right. I've seen suture. And of course, I don't know if I've ever seen needles in there. Like, there's been needles in the chamber, but definitely like suture gets sucked up in there. Yeah, I thought your comment too, just about how those arms operate through water pressure was really interesting. And I'm glad that we got to speak to that kind of test versus PM question, because I think that's probably one of the more practical questions folks would have after this episode is, okay, so what about this test though? So I'm glad Randalyn was able to speak to that. Well, great kickoff here to episode 1 of season 25, but we've got 7 more little things that are going to make a terrifically big difference in your sterile processing department. So hang with this season. Tell your clean freak friends out there to tune in to Beyond Clean. All these episodes are approved for CE contact hours. There should be a link somewhere in the show notes if you want to click over and take that CE quiz, get credit for your HSPA or your CBSPD certification. And like we tell you each and every week at Beyond Clean, until we talk to you again next week, keep fighting dirty.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to Beyond Clean on your favorite podcast app, or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for Beyond Clean in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@beyondclean.net. We look forward to hearing from you.